Good day, I am Rogie Ann Aca-ac from Section UU, and on behalf of my team, I present to you our presentation wherein we will talk about inventories. More specifically, we will discuss its definition, measurement, cost formulas, receipt and disposition of inventories, and a summary at the end of this video. I hope you'll listen until the end of our presentation and gain additional knowledge regarding inventories in government accounting. So let's get started. Here are our following learning objectives. First is to account for inventories by a government entity and to describe the procedures in the receipt and disposition of inventories by a government entity. Inventories. To define, inventories are assets that are held for sale in the ordinary course of business or operations, in the process of such sales, or in the form of materials or supplies to be consumed in the production process or in the rendering of services. So, based from that definition, yung mabubuo or ma-extract natin na elements or components ay itong tatlo, which are finished goods, work in process, and the raw materials and supplies. So, in short, inventories are assets that can be in the form of finished goods, which are the yun yung items na held for sale in the ordinary course of business. Second is the work in process, and third, it can be in the form of raw materials and supplies to be consumed in the production process or to be distributed in the rendering of services. And in addition, inventories has two classes: inventories of a trading or merchandising concern and inventories of a manufacturing concern. And as we have here, it clearly belongs to the second class, which is the inventories of a manufacturing concern, as it involved the work in process, the raw materials to be used in the manufacturing of the product of the business, and the finished goods. To be more specific, these are the inventories of a government entity. It includes inventory held for sale, inventory held for distribution, inventory held for manufacturing, inventory held for consumption, and the semi-expendable property. First is, let's discuss inventory held for sale. So, for an example for these are the medicines for sale in government pharmacies. So, inventory held for sale refers to the finished goods or items na binibenta ng isang business during its normal operations. Like for example, since we are talking about government entity, so ang example dito ay yung mga pharmacies na inside a government hospitals. Di ba, may mga hospitals naman na may sariling pharmacies kahit konti lang, like rare lang. And yung medicines na binibenta doon ay yun yung inventory held for sale. And other than that, ang maibibigay kong example ay yung sarili kong business together with my friend, which is yung scrunchie business. Scrunchie is yung pantali ng buhok. So since yung pagbebenta ng scrunchies ang main business or operations namin, so yung scrunchie mismo yung items or yung inventory ng aming business. And other examples could be like, for example, if your business is yung nagbebenta ng sasakyan or nagbebenta ng sapatos, so yung cars or yung sapatos na binibenta ninyo or yung during yun yung main operations ninyo, so yun yung inventory ng inyong business. Next is we have inventory held for distribution. So inventories held for distribution are assets which are held for distribution at no or nominal consideration in the ordinary course of operations. It is in the process of production for distribution at no or nominal consideration in the ordinary course of operations or in the form of materials or supplies to be consumed in the production process or in the rendering of services at no or nominal consideration. So inventories held for distribution may arise when an agency consumes or distributes certain goods at no charge or for a nominal amount. Like for example, Like a hospital may administer drugs to patients as part of the delivery of patient services. And another example could be the rice and other welfare goods held for distribution, or yung mga books or like school supplies na ipinamibigay ng isang agency to schools, di ba, for donation. So, yun yung inventory held for distribution. Next is we have the inventory held for manufacturing. So, it refers examples of these are the raw materials or the work in process. So, an example could be dun sa scrunchy business na mention ko earlier is that yung raw materials noon is like ang tela, ang thread na ginagamit sa paggawa ng items. So, yun yung inventory held for manufacturing. Yun yung items na gagamitin sa paggawa or pagbuo ng finished goods. Next is we have the inventory held for consumption. Kumbaga ito yung inventory or yung items na ginagamit or kinukonsume during the operations, or yung kumbaga yung process or during the business operations. Like for example, in an office of a government entity, diba gumagamit tayo ng bond paper, pens, ano pa, like office supplies or the office supplies inventory like the bond paper or kahit ano pa yung need mo sa like yung si normal business operations. And in comparison with the private sector, magkaiba sila actually ng treatment. Sa private sector is yung office supplies is tinitreat siya as prepaid, wherein dito si government entity is nire-record or tinitreat siya as an inventory. So again, yun yung inventory held for consumption, which are items of inventory which is consumed during the normal operations. And lastly, you have the semi-expendable property. It consists of machinery, equipment, furniture, and fixtures, and similar items that are not capitalized as PPE because their costs are below the 15,000 pesos capitalization threshold for PPE. So, an example of this is like in an office, again, is ang printer, di ba? Printer does not cost na nag-i-exceed siya ng 15,000. It more likely magre-range siya like 5 to until 10,000. So, it is considered as inventory of a government entity, which more specifically sa semi-expendable property. So, sa semi-expendable property, this could be again machinery, equipment, furniture, fixtures na hindi lalagpas sa 15,000 threshold. If lalagpas siya doon sa 15,000 is makukonsider na siya as PPE. To end my discussion, let's have a short knowledge check. First, situation is Entity A, a government hospital, acquires medicines to be sold in its pharmacy. Entity A would record the medicines acquired as, of course, inventory held for sale. Na-mention ko to kanina. So, yun mga medicines or items inventory in the government entity, which in this case is the government hospital, to be sold or to be held for sale. Next situation is Entity A, a government entity, purchases relief goods which are to be held on standby, ready to be distributed when a calamity strikes. Entity A would most likely classify the goods purchased as inventory held for distribution, of course. Ito yung na-mention ko kanina na inventories held for distribution which dinidistribute siya for no or nominal charge, like yung dinodonate, like here for example is during calamities. And lastly is Entity A government entity, purchases furniture and fixture amounting to 14,000 Entity A would most likely record the purchases as semi-expandable property. So it is considered as semi-expandable property. As I have mentioned, hindi siya lumagpas sa 15,000 pesos capitalization threshold. If lalagpas siya doon, again, is mako-considered na siya as 15,000, as PPE rather. So, if hindi siya lalagpas doon sa 15,000 threshold, is mako-consider siya as semi-expandable property. So, dito lamang nagtatapos ang aking parte sa discussion, and I hope makikinig kayo sa mga susunod pang parts ng aming presentation. So, thank you for listening, and I hope may natutunan kayo sa discussion ko. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and good day everyone. I am Nasren and I am going to continue the discussion on measurement. So inventories are initially measured at cost and they are subsequently measured as follows. So if the goods are held for sale, they are measured at lower of cost and net realizable value. So in the next slide, we're going to learn about the composition of cost and the exclusion of cost. But first, the measurement is at lower of cost and net realizable value if the goods are held for sale. The net realizable value is estimated selling price less estimated costs of completion and estimated selling or disposal cost. On the other hand, if the goods are held for distribution, it is measured at lower of cost and current replacement cost. The current replacement cost is the cost that the entity would incur to acquire the asset on the reporting date. So this is the composition of cost. The cost comprises the following. First, the purchase cost, and the other one is the direct cost. The purchase cost, hindi dito kasali yung mga trade discounts, rebates, and other similar deductions in purchase price. While yung direct cost naman ay yung mga cost na na-incur in bringing the asset to its intended location and condition. For example, dito mga freight cost and conversion cost. This conversion cost is only applicable for the manufactured items. So, ang conversion cost is yung cost of labor and production overhead. Sa cost, hindi kasali yung mga abnormal amounts of wasted materials, labor, and production overhead. And yung selling cost, for example, ng selling cost ay yung mga distribution costs, marketing costs, and commissions. And also, yung administrative overheads, hindi yun siya kasali sa cost. Example dito is yung salaries and wages of personnel performing staff functions. Okay, so in the exceptions, hindi dito kasali sa measurement yung mga inventories from non-exchange transactions. For example, is yung donations, yung mga inventories na nakuha from donations. So, yung mga non-exchange inventories from non-exchange transaction, they are initially measured at acquisition date fair value, while yung mga from agricultural produce, they are measured at fair values less costs to sell. So for these items, their initial measurements are deemed their costs. So for the purposes of subsequent measurement at the lower of cost or NRV or current replacement cost.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Norhayna Abdulwahab and I'm going to discuss about the cost formulas regarding inventories or chapter 7 from our government accounting book. So previously, na-discuss ng mga ka-group ko yung introduction and measurement ng inventory sa government accounting. Ngayon naman, i-discuss natin yung mga cost formulas na ginagamit sa pag-account ng inventory sa government. Diba sa PFRS, meron tayong specific identification, meron tayong FIFO or first in, first out, meron din tayong weighted average method, and meron ding average method. Sa government, ang ginagamit na cost formulas are dalawa lang. Namely, yung ating tinatawag na specific identification and weighted average cost. Yung specific identification, it is used for items that are not ordinarily interchangeable and those that are segregated for specific projects. For items naman that are not unique and cannot be segregated among others, gagamitin natin yung weighted average cost. And it is also used for large numbers of items of inventory that is, yun nga, ordinarily interchangeable. This shall also be applied to, under a perpetual inventory system. So, government accounting uses perpetual inventory system wherein kung ating matatandaan, every movement sa ating inventory account is meron siyang corresponding journal entry. Now, ang nagiging problema dito sa weighted average cost is every time na nagkakaroon ng purchases with different unit prices, magkakaroon ng change or difference or change sa weighted average unit cost. Regarding naman sa pag-compute ng ating weighted average cost, if you can still remember yung lesson natin sa financial accounting, ganun na ganun din yung ginagawa or pag-compute natin dito. Okay, so ito yung example ng ledger card na minomonitor ng mga accountant for inventory account. So, titingnan natin dito kung paano in effect tong inventory na to sa ating recording or monitoring. Dito sa supplies ledger card na to, ang ating inventory na ang ating inventory dito is yung tinatawag nilang ink cartridge. So, wait lang. As we can see, noong January 1, ang ating beginning balance is 1,332.55. And noong January 10, bumili tayo ng ink cartridge with a quantity of 12 and ang ating total cost na is 16,790.16. So kung ating papansinin, ang unit cost noong January 1 and yung unit cost natin nung bumili tayo ng inventory is magkaiba. Ito siya, 1,332.55 and 1,399.18. So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na doon sa weighted average cost, kasi ginamit dito is weighted average cost. So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na kapag bumibili tayo with different unit cost, magkakaroon ng change sa ating weighted average cost, which is ito siya. From here, naging ito na siya. Naging 1,394.05. So, kung ating papansinin dito sa ating ledger card, naiba lang ang ating unit cost kapag merong purchases meron tayong purchases. So, ito siya. Dito, from here, nag-iba. And then, dito na naman, nag-iba siya. And then, dito, nag-iba din. So, kapag naman nag-issue tayo is same lang yung unit cost natin. As you can see dito, dito sa ating issue column, makikita natin na yung unit cost natin is same lang. Dito din, same lang. Dito din is same lang. So, take note that each type of inventory is may kanya-kanyang ledger card. So, for our journal entries, ito yung ating proforma ng initial recognition for inventories. So, nandito lahat yung lima, yung inventory held for sale, inventory held for manufacturing, semi-expandable property, inventory held for distribution, and inventory held for consumption. So, for inventory held for sale, ang ating journal entry is debit merchandise inventory and then credit accounts payable. For inventory held for manufacturing, debit raw materials inventory and then credit accounts payable. For inventory held for distribution, we have debit welfare goods for distribution and credit accounts payable, and inventory held for consumption, debit office supplies inventory and accounts payable, and then for semi-expendable property, we have to debit semi-expendable machinery and credit accounts payable. So dito, we must be mindful of our use of accounts title. So, let us proceed naman doon sa subsequent recognition ng inventory. Yung tinatawag natin na recognition as an expense. As we all know, yung inventory is asset account siya, diba? So, kailan ba siya napupunta sa income statement or nagiging expense? So, the carrying amount of an inventory is recognized as expense in the period it is first sold. So, if it is an inventory held for sale, letter B, distributed if it is if the inventory is for distribution, and letter C, exchange if, say for example, yung entity nyo nagkaroon siya ng exchange with other entities, so exchange yun siya, and then letter D, consumed if it is held for consumption, and letter E, written down to its NRV or current replacement cost. So, kailan ito nangyayari? So, kapag yung NRV natin or yung CRC or current replacement cost natin is lower than the cost. In that case, magre-recognize na tayo ng expense. And take note that only the portion of the carrying amount in excess of the NRV or CRC is recognized as expense. Okay, so in page 192 in our book, there is an illustration relating to the acquisition of inventory for 1,000 on account. So our journal entry for that, when that inventory is held for sale, we have to debit merchandise inventory 1,000, credit accounts payable 1,000. When it is an inventory held for manufacturing, we have to debit raw materials inventory 1,000, and then credit accounts payable 1,000. Semi-expendable property, debit semi-expendable machinery 1,000, and credit accounts payable. So susundin lang natin yung binigay ko kanina na performa for journal entries dito sa ating mga inventory. For inventory held for distribution, welfare goods for distribution, debit 1,000, accounts payable, credit 1,000, and then for inventory held for consumption, we have to debit office supplies inventory for 1,000 and credit accounts payable of 1,000. Okay, so this is our journal entry when the entity recognizes the cost of inventory of 800 as an expense. So for inventory held for sale, we have to debit cost of sales 800, and then credit merchandise inventory 800. Inventory held for distribution, we have to debit welfare goods expense of 800, and then credit welfare goods for distribution of 800. And then inventory held for manufacturing, mahaba yung ano dito entry, so mamaya natin ipapakita. So inventory held for consumption, we have office supplies expense of 800, and then office supplies inventory credit for 800, and then semi-expendable property, yung entry natin for that is debit semi-expendable machinery and equipment expenses of 800, and credit semi-expendable machinery of 800 credit. Okay, so ito yung ating journal entry for inventory held for manufacturing. So, una, we have to debit work in process inventory, 2,000, and then raw materials inventory, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, credit, and ito siya, nire-recognize natin yung transfer ng raw materials, ng direct labor, and manufacturing overhead sa ating production process. So, kung paano natin i-recognize yung ito siya sa ating cost accounting, ganon din siya dito sa ating government accounting. So, kung mapapansin natin dito sa next entry, meron tayong debit of finished goods inventory of 2,000 and then credit of 2,000 na work in process inventory. Kapag nabenta na to siya, magde-debit tayo ng cost of sales and then finished goods inventory credit ng 2,000. Okay, so for our last illustration, sa ating book, page 193, sa illustration, meron siyang additional information or yes, stating that inventories costing 200 pesos are found to have a net realizable value of 150 and current replacement cost of 180 pesos. So, ang entry natin for that is for inventory held for sale, we have to debit impairment loss and credit merchandise inventory of 50 pesos, and then for inventory held for distribution, debit impairment loss of 20 pesos and credit welfare goods for distribution 20 pesos. So, kung matatandaan natin sa discussion ng ating previous reporter, yung inventory or goods held for sale is subsequently measured at lower of cost and net realizable value. So, kaya ang ating entry for that is ito siya. And then for goods or inventory held for distribution naman, these are subsequently measured at lower of cost and current replacement cost. So, kaya siya naging 20. I hope you understand. That is all, and thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good day everyone. My name is Princess Hania Aminoding, and let us proceed on receipt and disposition of inventories. For the receipt, first, end users prepare the purchase request form to request for the purchase of items not available on stock. The PR is the basis in preparing the purchase order. Kung walang purchase request form, walang magaganap na purchase order. So what are those end users? End users refer to the individual who will actually be using the items. So for example, the end users of office supplies are those who are working in the office. The end users for cleaning materials are janitors. The end users of books or gadgets are teachers or students. The end users of kitchen utensils are the cookers. So those are the examples of end users. Sila yung gagamit at sila din yung gagawa ng purchase request form to make purchase order. As an internal control, only the appropriate end users are allowed to make purchase requests for the items they need. For instance, yung janitor as the end user, siya yung gagamit ng cleaning materials. It would be inappropriate for an office clerk to make a purchase request for cleaning materials. Of course, hindi naman kailangan ng office clerk ng cleaning materials, hindi naman siya yung gagamit, thus, hindi siya yung gagawa ng purchase request form. Only the end users will make purchase request form for the items they need. Second, the authorized official prepares the purchase order. The purchase order is a document issued to the supplier when making a purchase. It indicates the specification, quantities, and agreed prices of the items being purchased. The purchase order serves as the contract between the entity and the supplier. For instance, a canvas from at least 3 suppliers are required for purchase amounting to 1,000 pesos and above. So, a purchase order is an official document issued by a buyer committing to pay the seller for the sale of specific products or services to be delivered in the future. The advantage to the buyer is the ability to place an order without immediate payment. Next, when the purchase items are delivered, the Property Supply Division signs the received portion of the delivery receipt and prepares the inspection and acceptance receipt. So the IAR will be used by the property inspector in inspecting and accepting the delivered items. A delivery receipt confirms the delivery of a message or package. There are several ways to use delivery receipts, including in mail exchanges as well as the logging of orders sent out by a company for delivery. The Property Supply Division forwards the delivery receipt, inspection and acceptance receipt, and purchase order to the property inspector. Next is the property inspector inspects the conformance of the delivered items with the specification in both the purchase order and delivery receipt and indicates the result of the inspection, such as acceptance or rejection in the IAR. Rejected deliveries will be returned to the supplier. So, inspection comprises measuring, examining, and testing to determine whether the materials provided in the shipment conform to contract requirements. The property inspector forwards the copies of DR, IAR, and PO to both the Property Supply Division and Accounting Division for recording. Next, the Property Supply Division, through the stock card keeper, records the accepted deliveries in the stock card. So the stock card shows the quantities of all receipts and issuances point inventory as well as the available balance at any given point of time. So a stock card is a sheet that tracks all your purchases, sales, return, and other drawings. The purpose of this is it tracks the unit price and inventory counts. Next, the Accounting Division records the accepted deliveries in the books of accounts and in the supplies ledger card. The SLC shows both the quantities and monetary amounts of all receipts and issuances of inventory as well as the available balance at any given point of time. The SLC is a form used in the Accounting Division or unit for each type of supplies to record all receipts and issued made. As an internal control, the stock card, which is maintained by the Property Supply Division, and supplies ledger card, which is maintained by the Accounting Division, are periodically reconciled. Lastly, the Property Supply Division prepares the disbursement voucher, then forwards it together with supporting documents to the Accounting Division for processing of payment. So, the disbursement voucher is a form used to pay an obligation to employees, individuals, agencies, creditors for goods purchased or services rendered. The Accounting Division or unit should stamp on the face of this form the date of receipt from the requesting unit. That would be all for the receipt. Thank you, and let us proceed on disposition of inventories.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Fatima Zaynab Abdulzamad, and my part will be on disposition until summary. The topics that we will tackle for the following slides are the requisition and issue slip, report of supplies and materials used, other documents used in the disposition, and of course, summary for Chapter 7 under Inventories. For government entities, disposing inventories follows an order. So for the following slides, we will be discussing the disposition of these inventories. So first, the end users prepare the RIS to request for the issuance of items available on stock. RIS, meaning Request and Issue Slip, is a document which is used primarily for informing a party about a specific request and needs to be addressed immediately. The slip should be filled out only by the authorized person of the company who will be executing the request. The RIS shall be used by the requisitioning division or office to request supplies, goods, equipment, property carried in stock, and by the supply and/or property division or unit to issue the items requested. So the head of the requesting individual shall approve the RIS, and the approved RIS is then forwarded to the property or supply division. So After the RIS is prepared by the end users, the head shall approve the RIS, and then the approved RIS shall likewise be forwarded to the property or supply division. So the property or supply division prepares what we call the report of supplies and materials issued, or what they call RSMI. So the RSMI is actually a form prepared by the supply and or property division to report or summarize all issues of inventories by stock number during the day. So the RSMI will be used by the stock card keeper in updating the stock card and the accounting division in journalizing the items issued. And next is that the accounting division records the items issued in the books and then also updates the supplies ledger card. In disposing inventories for a government entity, here are the other documents used in the disposition of inventories. So first we have the waste materials report. So this is a report prepared by the property or supply custodian to report wasted materials such as destroyed, spare parts, and other spoilages. So in the case of waste materials and worn out and obsolete spare parts, the waste materials report general form number 64A shall be used. Next, we have what we call the report on the physical count of inventories. So this is used in reporting the results of physical counts. It shows the balance of inventory as well as any shortages or overages. So the RPCI is a form used to report the physical count of inventory items by type, such as office supplies inventory, accountable forms inventory, medical, dental, and laboratory supplies inventory, food supplies inventories, and etc., which are owned by the agency or entity. So physical counts are a way of ensuring that a company's inventory management system is accurate and as a check to make sure goods are not being lost or stolen. Next, we have the report on the availability of accountable forms. So this is used to report the movement and status of accountable forms in the possession of an officer. So the RAAF is a form used by each accountable officer to report on the physical count of all accountable forms in his or her custody, such as checks, stamps, and etc. It shall be prepared monthly and by fund cluster. So this report shall be distributed to the accountable officer's file and the property division. And lastly, we have our inventory custodian slip. So this is prepared when issuing semi-expandable property. So the inventory custodian slip is used to issue tangible items amounting to less than 15,000 to establish accountability over them. So again, as we have heard from our reporter earlier, semi-expandable property, these are items which consist of machinery, equipment, furniture and fixtures, and similar items that are not capitalized as property, plant, and equipment because their costs are below the 15,000 capitalized threshold for PPE. Before we end this video, let us first have a brief summary for the Chapter 7 under Inventories. So first, inventories of government entities include inventory held for sale. So inventory held for sale examples are those medicines for sale in government pharmacies. Second, inventory held for distribution, meaning it distributes such as rice and other welfare goods. And then inventory held for manufacturing. So this includes raw materials and work in process. And inventory held for consumption and semi-expandable property. Held for consumption meaning gagamitin ng entity such as office supplies. And again, semi-expandable property consists of machinery, equipment, furniture and fixtures, and other similar items that are not capitalized as PPE because their costs are below the 15,000. Again, 15,000 capitalization threshold as PPE. Next, goods held for sale are subsequently measured at lower of cost and net realizable value. Lower of cost and net realizable value pag goods held for sale. Pag goods held for distribution naman, lower of cost and current replacement cost. Again, net realizable value is estimated selling price less estimated cost of completion and estimated selling or disposal cost. And then, yung current replacement cost is the cost the entity would incur to acquire the asset on the reporting date. And then, as we have learned earlier, cost comprises of the purchase cost and the direct cost incurred in bringing the asset to its intended location and condition, which, by the way, excludes the abnormal amounts of wasted materials, labor, and production overhead, as well as the selling cost and the administrative overheads. Again, held for sale, lower cost and net realizable value, and then held for distribution, lower of cost and current replacement cost. And lastly, the FIFO and periodic system are not used by government entities kasi government entities shall use the perpetual inventory system. Kasi under this system, lahat ng purchases, sales, and other transactions affecting the inventory are recorded in the inventory and the cost of sale accounts as appropriate. Meaning, we have our stock cards and stock ledgers na mini-maintain ng government entities. So, this enables the retrieval of information on cost and quantities of inventories sold and on hand at any given point of time. So, again, yung mga purchases ng supplies at saka materials na galing sa petty cash fund kasi kailangan ng gamitin are charged directly as expense. Kasi kung bibilihin mo naman tapos gagamitin mo agad, meaning it is an expense kasi hindi na siya kailangan i-inventory. So, I think that would be all for this report. Thank you so much for listening.